and they were like, "Oh, if you're so big, why have we never heard of you?"
Ouch.
That's quite a burn, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. We'd completely misidentified who we should be marketing at and what our audience was.
Obviously, the name of the show is Embracing Marketing Mistakes, and you've told us about a mistake that you that happened to you to do with a Spanish partner. Do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this was at my previous job. So we ran it was a startup. It was called The Newell. What we did were a bunch of students, and we were basically organizing video gaming competitions for students, tournaments, events, this kind of thing up and down the country. I think at peak we had, maybe 12 or 15,000 sort of students sort of participating on multiple different levels. It was a really weird little niche that we all loved. And we spent a very long time essentially carving the space out for ourselves. So trying to convince the game developers themselves to support the space, but also trying to convince them that it wasn't necessarily as valuable as they thought it was and they shouldn't take it away from us. So, we'd been running this, I think it'd been running by this point for 4 years, so 2016, where we had, we had books come along, so British University and College Sports, sort of said, "Hey, we're really interested in this space. You guys have done amazing work. Thank you very much for setting this up. We are now going to set up your competition." So that was fun. So obviously we were still sort of relatively young. Most of us were still students, slight panic, but we had some bigger sort of Spanish partners who did very similar things to us in Spain, but were operating on a much larger scale. So they were developing video games and all sorts themselves. So they actually organized a big meetup out there that we went to. And we presented who we were to a lot of their partners and a lot of partners that they brought in. Told them about our history, told them about everything that we'd been doing, for the past 4 years at that point, how we'd set up the whole market ourselves. And one of the people in attendance there was the sort of regional heads of Intel, so Intel UK, who were massively influential. Still are sort of in the video gaming space from an events perspective and from a tournament perspective. And they were like, "Oh, if you're so big, why have we never heard of you?" And
Ouch.
yeah, hearing that, it's slightly weird because I've told this story a few times, but I have somehow also blocked it completely from my memory. Like, I think the trauma of the moment, like, it definitely happened, and other people in the room there to confirm that it happened, but I have no actual full recollection of it.
That's quite a burn, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. When the biggest sort of regional partner, and you've just spent the last, hour and a half explaining why you're the hot stuff, and they're like, "Yeah, we've never heard of you."
Bring you back to earth with the bump.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's when the sort of realization hit. Might be jumping the gun from a marketing mistake perspective, but that's kind of realization hit of like, we'd just been speaking to the wrong people. So we'd completely misidentified who we should be marketing at and what our audience was. So, what we were there to obviously, from a passion perspective and from a user-based perspective, we were there to create amazing events for students. But what that actually meant, the students themselves weren't funding it. It was free. It was always free to enter, free at the point of entry. So we need to basically leverage that student base as a marketing tool. We were essentially a student marketing agency, and we just never realized that. And we were like, okay, we're a tech video game based student marketing agency. Intel is the biggest brand in this space, and they've never heard of us. That does not bode well.
Well,
And what happened to the company?
Oh, it's still going good. It's still going strong. Yeah. Funnily enough, about 5 or 6 years later, we sold to that Spanish company that had so graciously bought us out to Spain. So we are the Newell still exists, but is now a subsidiary of GG Tech, which is a Spanish company.
and did Intel start to get on board and work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's when we started to pull a few sort of big tech sponsorships. So we had Asus, Republic of Gamers sort of come on board. We had Amazon actually on board for, I think, 3 or 4 years directly. And they basically blanket sponsored everything. Because it was essentially like, here is a group of very engaged, usually STEM subject students who are spending money on expensive computer equipment, this is a very, again, very profitable audience to be wanting to market to.
Okay, yeah, it just shows you that you've got more than one audience, doesn't it? And you hadn't picked your audience to market to.
And I suppose you can live in a bit of a bubble when you're hyped amongst a very niche local audience.
We spent all our time speaking directly to students and having meetings and setting up councils and groups and all this stuff. And it's like which was right because the service was for them, so it needed to make sense and they needed to be on board. But they weren't paying for it. They weren't. We needed commercial partners on board who we weren't marketing towards, who didn't know who we were.
The people, anyone with money, basically.
Who's willing to shell out for us, and that's when and also I think when we were thinking very much in terms of like when we're thinking in terms of like we're trying to create tournaments and events and this kind of thing, we were very much operating in the traditional space of that gaming world. And we weren't sort of professional. These weren't professional teams. These weren't professional players. So the market value of of that was going to be way lower. So we had to approach it completely differently. And once we actually thought about that, it's like, okay, like what's really difficult from like a tech brand perspective, if you ignore the gaming side, it's getting people hands-on access to your tech, getting them to experience it. So the moment was like we started to build packages, like student support packages, where they could basically get a fleet of equipment sent out to them. They could run their own events. The students could run an event they could never do before because they got 50 PCs and all this amazing equipment. And the tech brands were like 50 people have just essentially beta tested all our products for us and give us insane level of in-depth feedback. Multiply that by 100 universities plus freshers fairs. That's now an insanely powerful proposition to a brand. Whereas, before we were like, oh, well, we're running this tournament and there's 300 teams involved and they're all online and they're not actually interacting with anything. That was much less of a powerful sell.